Hey, welcome to the show. I'm Yossi Goslin, NBA salary cap analyst, and in this video, I'm going to do a mock-off season on the Los Angeles Clippers, where I'm going to have them do some hypothetical moves and mainly just show how they can do them under the salary cap rules, mostly for educational purposes, but mainly fun. Make sure you're subscribed to me on YouTube, Apple, Spotify for all my previous content. Follow me on Twitter, Blue Sky. Now is the best time of year to do it. I'm going to have all sorts of analysis as transactions happen as we get closer to free agency, and subscribe to Third Apron, my newsletter. Much deeper salary cap analysis there. I've already covered the Clippers extensively on the podcast. I had Law Murray on to discuss them, and then I got deeper on all their salary cap dynamics on Third Apron. I put the links in the description. I highly suggest you check them out for a little more context on what I'm about to talk about. But in this video, I'm going to do 4 things. I'm going to restructure James Harden's contracts. I'm going to extend Norman Powell, trade for Jrue Holiday, and add a big man and point guard in free agency. So let's get to it. The Clippers received a lot of criticism last year heading into the offseason when it seemed kind of obvious that they weren't going to keep Paul George, and everything leading up to that point where he ended up just walking and not really getting anything for him. But they were ultimately right to let him go, and they were able to fill out their bench with some pretty good under the radar signings and role players, and more importantly, it allowed them to elevate Norman Powell and Ivica Zubac. So overall, they overachieved. They had a pretty good season. Personally, I'm not very excited about the group or the core. I don't think they're going to be winning a title with this group, and they don't really have any picks, any tradable assets to improve that situation. But they finally got their first healthy offseason since 2020 with Kawhi. And that, along with the idea that they don't have their own first round picks until like 2030, is probably going to give them the hope and motivation to keep on going, try to be as good as possible. So they're heading into the offseason with almost everybody coming back. They have 13 players on the roster. They have a couple pending player options, mainly Harden and Nick Batum. I'm guessing that Batum's going to pick his up. There's already reporting coming out that this might be his last year in the NBA. But as for James Harden, he might opt out. It sounds like he might be pushing for some sort of raise, maybe a longer deal. I don't know how much motivation there's going to be to give him like a very long deal, but I would guess they might want to align him on Kawhi's deal. Kawhi has this year and then another season left on his deal. So that would make sense if they're going to give him multiple years. Is there a budget on this team? Yes and no. We know that money's not really an object for the Clippers. They've had some of the highest luxury tax payments in the early part of this decade. But now with these second apron restrictions and these more punitive tax rates, they are, they'll be willing to pay some tax, but it sounds like they're going to be trying to, more importantly, have the flexibility that non-apron teams have to help improve the roster. So I've got them about $12 million below the tax, but more importantly, they're about $20.4 million below the first apron. That would give them access to the non-taxpayer mid-level exception at $14.1 million, and they got a couple other small trade exceptions here. They used their biannual last year to sign Nick Batum, so they're not going to have that this year. They'll regain it in the following season. So what can the Clippers do? Well, they can use that exception to increase their payroll, and they still have some more room under that. If you look at their apron space, they'll also be able to increase their payroll through trades. They can use those expanded trade exceptions where they increase their payroll. Teams over the first and second apron, they have to basically send back equal amount of money as they're taking back. So they have the flexibility to improve the payroll, to bring in some guys. They should definitely be able to improve their bench pretty easily. As I mentioned earlier, I think they're going to go after a backup big and a backup guard. I'm sure they can get that maybe even by splitting their mid-level exception. They could also sign and trade for a player that, they can not, if they don't want to send anyone under contract, they can even sign and trade their own free agents to bring in a player that could fill in their rotation. But can they upgrade their starting lineup? That is the question that I think is still pretty up in the air, especially because they don't have really any picks to trade other than a couple. So that's why I think a guy like Jrue Holiday can actually be attainable because he probably won't cost that much to get. So first, let's take a look at James Harden contract situation. So he has that player option worth $36.3 million. And as I mentioned earlier, I think he's going to try to decline it and get a higher amount, maybe an extra year on top of it. The big thing to note is that if the Clippers do give him any guaranteed money for next season, that's 26, 27, then they won't have any more 2026 cap space. That's been something that they've been planning for while still having Kawhi under contract. That would basically mean no Harden, no Norm Powell. But if they're going to trade for a guy like Jrue Holiday, who has multiple years left on his deal, 3 years left, then that will probably take him out of that. So very good chance that the Clippers use this offseason to add some money, some long-term money now, and skip having 2026 cap space. Now cap space isn't really a viable route to go after top free agents anymore. It's all through trade because everyone's extending. So here is a projection I made of how a Harden contract could look like. So I think the most important thing are the first 2 years, because like I mentioned, I would guess they're going to want to keep it on the shorter side. So something that would be, give him a slight raise and keep the salary just like, not too high. And you keep the first 2 years guaranteed, roughly 2 for 79. I think that could be the spot that the Clippers are agreeable to. Now, I also made like a longer version where it's non-guaranteed on the 2 years in the back end. This framework would be very similar to what Chris Paul did with the Suns in 2021. We're starting to see a little bit more contracts where players are having longer years, but less guarantees on them in the back years. This would give Harden a chance to make this much money if he's still playing at a high level. He can even still just get paid. He could make more money if he gets traded, and the Clippers need to increase his partial guarantee. So maybe there's something they can do where it's a long-term deal with very few guarantees on the back end. But I think as far as like what's guaranteed, it's going to be mostly the first 2 years. Now let's negotiate a contract for Norman Powell. So he's eligible for a maximum of 4 years, $120.5 million, which would start at $28.7 million and go all the way up to $35.6 million. I highly suggest you check out my Third Apron post in the description. I thoroughly analyzed that contract situation because I don't think he's going to get that full amount. I get the feeling that if there is an extension to be done, it's going to be something much smaller. And where I came down to was about 13% of the salary cap for a couple of reasons. Comparison-wise, you can look at a guy like Cam Johnson. It'd be a pretty similar contract as him. And for what it's worth, Norm Powell's current contract that he signed with the Blazers in 2021 is also worth 13% of the cap. So basically, here's a projection where he redoes that deal, but it's adjusted for inflation. So it would start at roughly 22.2, top out at 25.8, 3 years, $72 million. He makes more money annually than he did in his previous deal. And it protects the Clippers on the back end. I would guess that they want to keep this on the shorter end. If they want, maybe it could be a 4-year deal that goes up to $100 million. But he's 32, so maybe they want to keep it a little shorter. Now, I also think it's worth noting that, he's on an expiring contract. If there is no extension done, I could see him becoming a trade candidate this season. And now, before we get into the trades, I just want to go over the Clippers draft pick situation over the next 8 drafts, because I just don't see them trading any future first-round picks, and here's why. So they could trade their current first-round pick, the 30th overall pick in this year's draft, which probably won't have that much value, but they cannot trade any of their future firsts between 26 and 29. So the next 4 years, they can't trade any of them. And that's because they already traded their 2026 and 2028 first. That 2026 is tied to that Paul George trade, still hasn't ended. And that 2028 pick is tied to their acquisition of James Harden. So those trades are still outstanding. And the Stepien rule prohibits teams from trading picks in consecutive years. So because they owe that 26 out, they can't trade 27. Same thing here. They traded their 28. They cannot trade their 2029. So that means that the earliest pick that they can trade that's not this year's 2025 would be their 2030. And if they wanted to trade multiple, they could also trade their 2032 on top of that. I don't see them moving either of these picks unless it gets them a young star. And I just don't see one coming their way. So that's why I think that they make sense as a team for a guy like Jrue Holiday, because of his contract, there's a lot of discourse on what the Celtics can even get back for him. Do they even have to give up something to get off of him? I don't think that'll be the case, because I think there's still going to be several teams interested in him. But it's more so, instead of getting value for him because of the 3 years he has left on his contract. Maybe the value comes more so from the savings that they can get, both in the short and long term, and not so much future draft equity. So here's a trade I came up with. Now, before I get into the details, I'm going to preface this, like with all my other videos, that I'm not saying that this is exactly what the Celtics would be getting back, but this is just mainly to show what is required on the Clippers end, specifically salary matching wise, to make a deal work. So since the Clippers are going to be operating below the first apron, they can use one of the expanded trade exception rules. So they just need to get within $8.5 million of Jrue Holiday's $32.4 million salary. So to get there, I've got them trading Bogdanovic, $16 million, and Chris Dunn, $5.4 million. That comes up just short of the $23.9 million required. So to get to the total required, I had them include Drew Eubanks. Jrue has a $4.8 million salary, but it's non-guaranteed. So in order to help meet the required amount, I had them increase his partial guarantee up to $2.4 million. So basically gets it half guaranteed just for being traded. So pretty good piece of business for Drew Eubanks. Increases the chance of his guarantee getting fully guaranteed. And now, look, maybe the Clippers need to give up a little something else. Maybe they just give up like the 30th pick in this draft, just in case there is sort of a bidding war if there are a lot of teams interested. Beyond that, I would say the Clippers should probably walk away. But as far as an actual trade that can happen between these teams, and keep in mind that the Clippers were one of the teams that went heavily after Jrue Holiday before he got traded to the Celtics, I would guess that it's going to be an expanded deal where maybe instead of the Celtics taking all these guys back, another team can get involved and take some of them so they could save even more money. Because here they're only saving about $8.5 million. But what if you can get a team with a big enough trade exception or with cap space to take on Bogdanovic? Now you're saving like $25 million in total. And that would give them significant savings against the tax. I also highly suggest you check out what I've written about them and discussed about them on the podcast and newsletter. I've gotten very deep into how I could see them looking to save money next year. So here's the final roster that I put together. As you can see, I got Harden on his new salary. I've got Holiday in for Bogdanovic, Chris Dunn, and Drew Eubanks. I went ahead and split the mid-level exception between a couple guys I could see the Clippers pursuing. They need a backup big. I put Clint Capella there, 2 for $16 million, and Malcolm Brogdon, a player that they actually technically traded for 2 years ago as part of that Kristaps deal to the Celtics until it fell through. I got them using the rest of their mid-level exception, giving him 2 for 12. And you might notice that I don't have the Clippers pick this year anyways, and Nick Batum is not there. That's because with all these moves I made, they're getting pretty close to the first apron. It's becoming a pretty tight squeeze when considering they still need to get the 14 players. So I had them trade Batum with the 30th pick in a move that has them move down to the second round. They don't have a second round pick this year, so now they do. Much cheaper salary than the 30th overall pick. And after filling up their roster with 2 veteran minimum guys, yeah, this is their roster. They're slightly over the tax and they're just below the first apron because they used the trade exceptions to increase their payroll in the trade and use more than the $5.7 million taxpayer portion of the mid-level exception. Those are both triggers for the first apron. So yeah, they are hard capped to that amount and cannot exceed it at any point this season. And now let's take a look at the Clippers roster I put together for next year and see if it's viable for another season. So I've got Harden on that second year salary I gave him. Same thing with Capella and Brogdon, slightly higher raises on the second years of their deals. And I've got Norman Powell on that first year salary of the extension that I projected. And they're just at 12 players, about $2.3 million below the luxury tax. But as you can see, more importantly, about 11.2 below the first apron. So they still have plenty of space to use their mid-level exception or use the expanded trade exceptions to increase their payroll and fill out their depth if needed. And that is a mock-off season, everyone. Thank you for watching. I really enjoyed doing this one. Clipper fans, let me know, would you go after Jrue Holiday like this, knowing if you don't have to give up really any significant asset, or is it not really an exciting build? It's a little older, and would you rather see them pivot to something a little different? Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and make sure you subscribe to everything I have in the overlays listed, and check the description and the link below about Sports Business Classroom. There's still a few spots available. I've got a sign-up code for those that still are interested in joining.